Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name's Steve Nail. My company, Intervest Corporation, we have been in the business of providing affordable housing in Mississippi for almost 40 years now. I am here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, to maybe point out a few areas that this committee may have an impact to provide that affordable housing. In the past, we've utilized rural development in the form of they used to call it Farmers Home, now rural development and their programs. We've utilized HUD, which is a primary player in a lot of this, but recently the best way to provide this type of housing is through the Section 42 low-income housing tax credit, which administered by Mississippi Home Corporation. Scott Spivey over there, they do a great job. They are empowered, of course, to provide credits under an application process. And we have been doing this since the late 80s in conjunction with these other programs. What I'm here today to talk to you primarily about is a crisis and shortage in our elderly affordable housing. And to give you a little perspective, I have actually bought and renovated utilizing tax credits in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I did their old school about 10 years ago. It's about the only way to do this under the tax credit program because we don't score many points under their application process. Not their fault, but their primary goal is providing affordable housing, and now it is going primarily to families. Not a problem. We know there's a tremendous need there, and we provide a lot of that. We have 35 properties around the state that do that. Most recently, I bought the old Hattiesburg High School in the past 4 years. It will begin leasing up Monday. So to give you an idea of the shortage and the market there is for this type of housing, I have leased all of our units. I will have a waiting list the first day I open. And to give you a little perspective in who qualifies for this, you have to be 60% of the area median income, which is it's Section 42 of the IRS Tax Act. In our property in Hattiesburg, there's a handful that we're allowing people that are 30% of area median income. So when I go in to try to zone one of these properties, you know, of course, I work with a lot of municipalities and overcome their concerns. They're worried that we're maybe leasing to someone that might be too low income or whatever. And I challenge them to take a look at their elderly population. In every place I've ever been, 90% of people that are 62 years of age and older qualify for that 60% area median income. And if you think about it, you know, these are people living on fixed income, Social Security, and they're paying their housing expense out of that. Our units at Hattiesburg, and most of them that we're going to be doing in the future, will rent for $600 to $800. It's not a giveaway. It is not a subsidized program. So these people are allocating their Social Security dollars to have a good place to stay. Schools work great because they have interior corridors. You've got a lot of windows, which you need for bedrooms. So the schools have worked great, and I've actually optioned and are going to develop and have the tax credits for a property in Tupelo. It's the old Carnation milk plant. And we'll start construction probably the middle of next year. Just a lot of hoops to jump. We're combining the low-income housing tax credit along with the historic credit. So very complicated. I'm able to serve a very small number of people with a lot of work, because these things take a lot of effort. There's a lot of expertise and a lot of cooperation that has to go into making one of these work. I would like for this committee to take a look at maybe a plan that I've been working on the last few years that I could provide a lot more of this type of housing if we had another way to provide some more equity. And not here asking for dollars for grants or anything like that. A lot of states have adopted a state housing credit. Now, they are broad in the way they approach. They allow everyone to come in, and if you have an allocation of Section 42 credits, you automatically get an allocation of the state credit. What I'm saying is, because this is such a crisis, and I'm going to hand out, when I'm finished, a study that we did to really demonstrate the nationwide crisis. They call it the silver tsunami that's about to occur, with all of the baby boomers that are now needing housing, that are now in the market and are not finding that good quality, affordable housing. But my proposal is that we find a way to provide a credit that would piggyback on top of an allocation of credits that we get through. And I don't want to get too technical. There are two ways of getting credits. You have a 9% credit that you go and you qualify for through an application process, but there's also a 4% credit. You get less than half of what you would get. It won't work in Mississippi. In high-income areas, Atlanta, Baltimore, areas like that, they're able to make that work with a 4% credit. We need something extra here. So if we narrowly provided a housing credit just for elderly properties under the 4% tax-exempt bond route, we can make a lot of these properties work building new construction rather than me finding a historic that adds the extra dollars that would make it work. So that's point number one that I wanted to make. It's the elderly crisis, and like I said, I've got a study to hand out. But I'd also like you to consider the fact that there is a tremendous need in some of these neighborhoods to tear down housing, to this blighted, there have been some programs targeted for blighted housing. But I'll give you an example. We've tried to adopt a neighborhood in South Jackson, Bel Air subdivision. And Pastor Langford Porter, his church, the Apostolic Restoration Church there, which is right there by an area that we are interested in, working very hard, but it's been frustrating. It's an area, I built a property there in the 80s called Apple Manor. It's an elderly complex. We stay completely full. I bought another property across the street 15 years ago that we have renovated, turned into tax credit housing. It's family. But we're putting a lot of equity in this neighborhood. So I was shocked to find out that this particular area, Jackson, is not in an opportunity zone. You know, I know of some of the really nice areas that have been designated opportunity zones. Very troubling when we're trying to make something work in an area like this, and they do not have the ability to even qualify for the blight elimination program. So there's a tremendous need there, and I've done a study. There are 44 houses in this neighborhood that need to be torn down. To make these properties come back, we're spending equity dollars down there and in the area, but trying to find ways, and I don't know if I know a lot of study has been done on land banks and things like that. I don't know how to do it, but we are going to need some help, and we've been with the city of Jackson trying to help these particular areas. So that's an area, and I've got a study that if anybody's interested, I can show you that effort too. I'm part of a working group now trying to, and I don't know if this will come under your committee, but the HBCUs of the state that need dormitories, and I'm on a working committee trying to provide a way to finance to help these institutions to provide better housing for their students. We think we know of a few ways, and we can come back and talk about that. It's probably we're just kicking it off, getting it off the ground, but tremendous need there. So I come here just giving you a set of problems. I don't have really as many answers, but I think the tax credit, the state tax credit specifically designated for elderly would be a tremendous help. I've drafted some legislation I've had a little help with that. So I'll be glad to share a lot of that, and you'll have my information if you want to get in touch with me at some point in the future. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Any questions?
Oh, any questions?
From committee members?
Can I hand this out if I put my mask on?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay, you said that you wanted to piggyback on the allocation of Section 42 credits if the state were to create a state housing credit. Well, first you would have to get the allocation from the Mississippi Home Corps on the Section 42, wouldn't you?
And that's where it gets technical. There's two ways of getting credits. One is the 9%, which is the application process. The other way is through a tax-exempt bond issue, that I can just gather some properties, put them together, and go through the process. It's not as easy as I just said it, but it is a way to get a capture, and it's really not, it's kind of, the HEROES Act would have corrected this, that's in Congress now, but it's not truly a 4% credit. Right now it's about 3.2%. So it's really, it's less than half, almost a third of what you would get in a normal 9% allocation. So you can get those without having to compete.
And this is new construction.
New construction.
How would creating I guess, a state opportunity zone?
That's got merit. It doesn't carry all of the benefits you can get through those designated opportunity zones, which in the HEROES Act, they expand that and they're able to double the amount of opportunity zones, but that would help. But in the example I gave you in South Jackson, it for some reason did not get put in that opportunity zone. And so you're kind of excluded from a lot of benefits, such as that blight elimination program.
But weren't those opportunity zones established, I believe, under Governor Bryant?
Correct.
And so, therefore, we cannot, those were approved federally.
That's correct.
Related to the HBCUs, how would you assist them in housing? How can you? That's
the working group I'm with now, we're addressing it. I brought it up because I think it is a critical need. Tougaloo is an example. They've got housing, but it needs renovation. They actually need more housing to compete so that they can get the students that they need.
I know that Tougaloo had looked at getting someone to build dormitories. And what kind of program was it going to be? Were they, you all would build it as a developer, and then the school would be responsible for paying?
We're wide open to any ideas there. And at first they thought they could utilize the housing tax credit. That doesn't qualify. They are not for students. They're actually prohibited under the Act.
And have you done any, I guess, construction at the majority schools that could be then replicated at the HBCU?
We are looking at some of those examples. They're all private. They're off-campus private, and so consequently, it doesn't quite fit what we're doing. And I've been involved with the Delta State. They are allocating one of their golf courses to trying to do a lot of that. And we've been awarded that, but trying to make it work. And of course, you've got difference between the state higher learning folks and which you don't have with Tougaloo and some of the private.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Could I hand these out if I put my mask on?
And you can give them to Ms.
Okay.
Trowles, and then that way she can get them to the other committee members as well. Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Megan Elder. Elder.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. Before I start with we have two presentations today that I'm going to do. The first one, I'm going to read some comments on behalf of the Mississippi Association of Affordable Housing Providers. I'm currently their administrator and have been asked today to represent them. I do have copies of this letter. Would you like me to pass that out now or wait until after? Okay. Chairman Blackman, Vice Chairman Witherspoon, and members of the Senate Housing Committee, thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony. I'm presenting these remarks on behalf of John Sullivan, President of the Mississippi Association of Affordable Housing Providers. MAP represents a diverse set of entities working in the affordable housing industry in Mississippi, including for-profit and nonprofit developers, banks, and other lenders, public housing authorities, attorneys, architects, property managers, and construction companies. Our members work regularly with the Mississippi Home Corporation and local governments Our members work regularly with the Mississippi Home Corporation and local governments to use scarce government resources to provide subsidized homes affordable to working-class Mississippians. Even before COVID-19, Mississippi, like every state in the country, had problems with housing affordability. Out of roughly 350,000 renters statewide, 1 in 5 paid monthly rents that were half of their income or more. Around half of renters making $35,000 to $40,000 a year or less are paying too much in rent, calculated in our industry with the standard of paying more than 30% of the monthly income and rent cost. In no state does the housing market entirely meet the needs of those in the middle and lower income spectrum. To help fill this gap, the affordable housing industry partners with state and local housing agencies to build and rehabilitate housing units set aside specifically for low-income households. The main tool in these public-private partnerships is the federal low-income housing tax credit, known as the housing credit. The housing credit is the only substantial source of affordable housing subsidy in the country and finances most, if not nearly all, affordable rental housing projects in the U.S. MAP works closely with our members and the Mississippi Home Corporation and our members to ensure housing credits are being maximized to meet the needs of our residents. The housing credit produces housing that is affordable to low-income residents and serves as a neighborhood asset for towns and cities. When we give tours of housing credit properties, we often get remarks on the appearances of the homes and that they do not look like affordable housing. When COVID-19 started to spread, MAP immediately foresaw the problems the pandemic would cause for the economy and jobs and the risk posed to renters and their ability to pay rent. Simply put, if workers could not work, they could not pay rent and would be at risk of losing their homes, given that many renters were already having a hard time paying rent, as stated before. We knew that we would find it very difficult to maintain monthly rent payments with any decrease in income, and they would not have much savings or credit to fall back on. We also estimated that the pandemic-related job losses would fall harder on renters. While renters make up 1/3 of all Mississippi households, renters constitute roughly half of our households making less than $35,000 a year, who are more likely to have income and job loss from COVID-19. We estimate a 10% statewide unemployment rate translated to at least a 15% unemployment rate in the renter population. Both the state and federal government took emergency actions to ensure renters would not be kicked to the street or forced into crowded living conditions in a pandemic. The governor issued a statewide eviction moratorium that ended up running to June 1st, and the federal government enacted a limited eviction moratorium for federally assisted rental properties that ran until July 27th. In early September, President Trump issued an order through the CDC to halt all evictions for non-payment of rent. It is important to understand that this requires that the renters take proactive action to assert this right, so evictions are still proceeding. It is also important to note that the eviction moratoriums only covered one side of the equation and did not offer any help to rental property owners. Rental properties are still expected to maintain operations and pay staff, taxes, and utilities. The moratoriums offered only a temporary solution. Once they expired, the renter would still be on the hook for the entire amount of rent remaining unpaid and face imminent eviction. That is why MAP lobbied the legislator and the governor for rental assistance funding. Rental assistance was the only solution that would keep renters from losing their homes and still give rental property owners the funding they need to pay their expenses. In May, MAP alerted the legislator and governor of its estimate that renters and rental properties could be facing a rent gap of $120 to $140 million through the end of the year. In late September, the National Council of State Housing Agencies estimated the rent shortfall in January 2021 to be $160 to $225 million. The numbers are high, but are believable when you do the math. If you estimate 15% unemployment rate among 350 renter households, that equals 52,000 renter households unable to pay $700 to $800 rent each month for several months. The total amount of unpaid rent gets into the hundreds of millions. We are greatly appreciative that the legislator and the governor both allocated funding to meet this need. The Coronavirus Relief Fund and the Community Development Block Grants were funding the sources made available through the CARES Act that could be used for rental assistance. The legislator allocated $20 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, of which $15 million will go for residential rental assistance, and Governor Reeves allocated $38 million in community development block grants for rental assistance. It should be noted that CDBG funding could be used for a variety of needs at the governor's discretion, and the governor chose keeping renters in their homes as the top priority for the funding. We are grateful for these allocations and hopeful that we will meet the rental gap need for several months. Although we cannot foresee how long these funds will last, it is unclear what will happen under President-elect Biden's administration with eviction moratoriums and more pandemic relief for renters and workers. If the CDC eviction moratorium expires on January 1st, it is likely that many landlords will file evictions on overdue tenants who will have to find other housing and incur debts that they will never be able to pay off. The stain of eviction filings could follow renters for a long time and restrict their access to credit. We ask for the following support from the Housing Committee members and other legislators. Please keep in communication with the Mississippi Home Corporation and the CDBG rental assistance funding and help spread the word to your constituents and local elected officials in your jurisdiction about the availability of funding for renters. Mayors and aldermen are hearing that most landlords and renters about their needs and notifying them of resources available. Please keep the housing needs of renters as a top priority throughout the pandemic. Stable housing is truly critical to the health of our residents. This is true all the time, but especially during COVID-19. If additional federal funding becomes available, please consider the needs of renters when deciding the uses of the funds. We will continue to monitor and keep you informed on renters' needs. Again, we are confident the amount dedicated by the legislature and the government will meet the needs of the renters in the short term. But it is uncertain the impact that the pandemic will have on the economy and workers in 2021, and therefore the ability for the renters to stay safely housed will remain a risk until this pandemic is over. Thank you for the opportunity to share these comments before you today.
Any questions? Okay, do you have a question? No? Okay, I think I have a couple. Now, when does the money for the relief of when does the money that is given under the CARES Act via the legislature, when is the deadline for that?
The deadline to apply is November 15th, and then they'll begin reviewing applications at that point, and the funds will be distributed around December 14th or December 15th.
And those funds will be going to the affordable housing developers and the landlords?
Correct. So any money that's applied for will go directly to the landlord to apply to any tenant's account that is behind. Whenever they applied, they had to apply per tenant and show that each tenant, how much they were behind, and provide documentation.
And you said that come January, that once it expired, that you all would, well, that landlords would perhaps start filing evictions. Well, does not this money go through December?
It does go through December, but there is concern that once we get through December, if people will be able to continue to pay, their rents in January or February. The payments were only for assistance from March of this year through December, so the concern is just going forward.
But beginning January 1, you can't evict someone, can you?
No, it would be if they didn't pay their January rent, then the eviction process could begin.
And then you have to go through a process for that.
Correct. You have to go through a court filing. Yes, ma'am.
So how long does it generally take? Because don't you have to go through the justice court?
Yes, and it really depends on the jurisdiction where you're at. Some places you can get a ruling as soon as 3 days for the tenant to go ahead and be removed, and then sometimes it takes longer. The constable has to come out, so it could take a couple of weeks. We've seen with COVID that it was taking longer to evict.
Of the monies that have been allocated, and with this deadline coming of November 15th, how much of that money do you anticipate that you all will be utilizing?
As of this morning, I believe a little over $15 million has been requested, and like I said, they're still taking applications through the 15th. And we're hopeful that all of the money that's been requested will be applied because it's greatly needed and it'll go a long way.
So you have 43 million with the, no, 53 million, 15 from, as a result of the legislature, and then 38 million from the governor.
Yes, ma'am. The $15 million is through the Mississippi Rental Assistance Program. I believe the other funds were allocated for a program through the Mississippi Home Corporation.
With the pandemic and it's in full, it's full blown again, how has that affected the gathering of individuals at apartment complexes? Really, once the pandemic hit, most events or any kind of functions where residents could gather, those pretty much ceased. The offices were shut down. The workers still continued to come to work, but you had to have an appointment. They weren't allowing people to come into the offices to, make payments, property tours, things like that you would typically have to be able to rent that apartment were done virtually. So it really changed the way properties, had to operate during this time. And yesterday, I can't remember who it was telling us about the apartment complexes and I guess affordable housing units would dedicate so many units to the mentally ill, people who are coming from community health centers. Do you have an idea as to how many are designated for that?
I don't have that information, but I'd be happy to get that answered and get back to you.
You also indicated in your comments that the only mechanism for affordable housing for the most part throughout the country is the housing credit.
Yes, ma'am.
Do other states provide any other programs?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, those are all the questions I have. Thank you so much.
And I also have another presentation for MAA when I'm finished with this one.
Senator Norwood has a question.
Yes. Come January, how many rentals do you think may be impacted, negatively impacted, with the expiration of the moratorium?
Honestly, that's not data that we have. We've tried to gather that information, but we haven't been able to. And I don't want to guess or speculate. I don't think it's as high as we anticipated that it would be, but I don't have an exact number. I'm sorry.
And the CDBG dollars, that was the CARES Act funding, not the regular CDBG dollars?
Correct, yes.
Thanks.
Okay, the next presenter.
So now we're going to present on behalf of the Mississippi Apartment Association. I'm currently serving as their association executive, and I have Kevin Hodges here. He is with Heritage Properties. He's one of our members. They are one of the largest Mississippi-owned management companies in the state, and they represent a good portion of our membership throughout the state. So we wanted to kind of let you guys hear from our perspective as well as someone who's kind of on the ground. So as I said, I'm here to represent now the Mississippi Apartment Association. MAA members are rental housing owners, property management companies, and individual apartment communities that service or supply products to the rental properties. Currently, MAA represents over 300 members throughout the state, which equates to 31,000 apartment units in Mississippi. It's also important to note that our industry helps contribute $11.5 billion to the state economy and supports 70,000 jobs. So during the COVID crisis, MAA immediately jumped into action to help get information out to our members to assist them in how they could help their tenants, their staff. One of the things that MAA did at the very beginning of the pandemic was we called on our members to be compassionate and work with their tenants to find creative ways to be able to help make their rent payments on time. We continuously encouraged that tenants and landlords both kept open communication. We thought that was very important so that everyone knew, where everyone stood and could help them make arrangements. Several of our members got very creative with how they worked with their tenants. Typically, your rent's due the first of the month, and we saw several members allow residents to be able to pay weekly, to pay bi-weekly, do whatever they could to catch up, to make payments. A lot of our members helped with payment plans. It's not really something that you would have seen before COVID, or also help come up with plans where they could catch up on the rent on the back end. So we were very excited to see that our members were able to help residents in that way and get really creative. Also, several of our members waived late fees during that time, so if you were late on your rent, they excused that, which also helped the resident and didn't give them increased burden of having more money to have to pay back. And so one thing that, kind of went unnoticed with this, when COVID happened, not only did it affected the entire world, but, our properties, they were essential workers. They had to continue to come to work every day, continue to run properties while they were homeschooling their babies in the back. Our maintenance workers were sent into apartment complexes not knowing if they would contract COVID and bring it home to their family. So not only are we here today to talk about the landlords and the tenants, but we really want to recognize what our members had to do and how much they had to step up. We represent 31,000 units across the state, which equates to about 620 on-site staff members who were affected and had to really very quickly determine how are we going to operate our business, keep our tenants safe, keep ourselves safe, and continue to give our residents the homes that they need. So we really wanted to salute what we are calling our on-site essential staff members because they were there helping make sure that air conditioning units still worked and plumbing issues were taken care of, all while potentially risking themselves and their families. I'm going to call Kevin to come up and talk a little bit about the CDC restrictions and the eviction moratorium and kind of how that affected properties. So I'll let Kevin speak about
that. Thank you. Again, my name is Kevin Hodges. I am with Heritage Properties, but also a member of the Mississippi Apartment Association. The current CDC restrictions on evictions is hurting both property owners as well as the residents. Residents are unfortunately piling up debt that most will never be able to pay back. This will end up in eviction, and due to evictions affecting credit, this will prevent them in many cases from being able to rent other homes or purchase a home. Property owners will end up turning these accounts over to collection agencies and in return only being able to collect about 50% of every dollar that collection agency gets, if the collection agency is able to get any of the money at all. This will put further strains on property owners to be able to pay their mortgages, the staff, and the care of the community taking care of its residents. Many residents chose not to exercise the CDC form. They knew that the debt was going to continue to grow, and they continue to struggle every month with reduction of pay, loss of jobs, but they're still fighting hard to be able to pay the rent. The MRAP program has been extremely beneficial to those accounts that qualified. MRAP does not assist property owners in the lost funds for those residents who have already had to skip out or leave and move in with other family members because of the loss of job or reduction of income. So we're not able to collect any money back on that. MRAP will not be able to assist property owners in the loss of funds that will not be able to pay rent in January. Most property owners want to maintain their properties and take care of their residents. Due to these loss of funds and these trying times, it's getting tougher and tougher for the property owners. MAA applauds the state leaders for allocating the total of $58 million for rental assistance. There is still money available to be applied for between now and November 15th. We hope to be able to use this venue to be able to help spread the word on that matter. But we do need to keep focused on understanding that we've got a number of months left in this year, and we've got a COVID fight still ahead of us that's growing every day. So we ask for you to continue to help us pay attention to the items and issues that are going on with renters, since we are such a large population of this state. And we thank you for your time. I'll turn it back over to Megan.
And very similar to MAP, we just ask that you all continue to consider the renters and funding for them going forward. We know that hopefully with the rental assistance and them being able to apply for that, that'll help them through this year. But this is going to be an ongoing fight as the pandemic continues. So we just ask that you just keep renters as the top priority, and we thank you for your time.
Questions? Senator Norwood? Speaking to the mic.
Are there fees, late fees, and penalties attached to during the moratorium? Were there late fees and penalties attached to the individuals not paying the rent?
I believe most of our properties did still charge late fees during that time. Some of them chose to waive those late fees. It just depended on the property owner and their management company.
Okay, and if they were they eligible to be paid out of the funds that were granted through the state and through the CARES Act?
I don't believe that, yeah.
Not through the CARES Act? Okay. Now, so you don't know, at this point, you still are not aware of the financial impact that it may pose come January 1.
We are not, but we do know that there's been an overwhelming response to the MRAP program and the applications. There's, like I said, as of today, there's a little over 15 million that's been requested in just a 2-week period. So there's obviously a lot of landlords out there who have renters who are behind, and that number shows it. And that's just March through December. You know, we don't know what January holds. So we're hopeful that these payments will help get the tenants caught up so that they have peace of mind and they know that they'll have a home for the holidays. But it also gives some relief to the landlords who they're still paying mortgages every month. They're still paying for staff. This will allow them to have some peace of mind and continue to operate and give those residents, you know, the attention and care that they need for their home.
And again, we're extremely thankful for it, but one of the struggles that some communities are facing, especially larger apartment communities, is you were only able to apply for $30,000. Well, when you've got multiple residents that are behind 3 and 4 months, that $30,000 goes away very quickly. So there are people now that communities have not been able to apply for money because they've reached their $30,000 gap. So once they reach that maximum, there are still residents sitting there that eviction proceedings will be applied for.
Now, What percentage of the apartments do you think you were able to serve through this process?
Our company has 34 apartment communities in the state, which totals up to be about 7,012 units. We were very fortunate that we only applied for 317 residents. There are some that fall into that case where we had reached our $30,000 gap or max, and we're not able to apply for funds for those at some of our larger apartment communities. And we were fortunate that some of our apartment communities didn't have to apply for it at all.
Now, also, were you able to utilize other, do referrals to your individual tenants to utilize some of the other programs that will provide funding, rental assistance?
Absolutely. We kept and still keep a large list of agencies and programs in our office to be able to help turn around and give to those residents. Many of the programs are out of money. RAMP was one very strong program that lasted for a while here in the state, but it ran out of money quickly.
Okay, thanks.
What would happen, I understood you to say that represent 31,000 jobs.
70,000 jobs throughout the state.
70,000, where did I
70,000.
get 31,000 from?
31,000 units.
31,000 units,
Apartment door,
70,000
kinda.
jobs. Okay, so what, do you know, have you all done anything to determine what impact that would have on the state economy if these 70,000 jobs, if you lost 20 or 30 of those, 20 or 30,000 of those 70,000 jobs?
That's not something that we've done yet. Our goal is to be able to collect a little more data than what we do have with COVID. We were never prepared or set up to collect this data, so we haven't been able to gather that information, but we would like to. But I can tell you it would be very impactful, without having the numbers. I mean, if we have that much of our working force for the industry without jobs, that's going to impact them greatly.
The monies that came from the governor's office, now, are they being administered in the same manner as the money that came through the legislature? Or do you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so when you all are submitting your request for funds to the MDA?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And is it utilizing the same, I mean, whether the money, the 38 million for the 15 and the 15 million, are they in the same pool that you're accessing?
I believe the MRAP money is a different pool from the 38 million. And it will be administered by MDA, and checks will be cut and sent directly to the landlords to apply to those tenants' accounts.
And for us to talk with our local entities between now and the 15th.
Right.
You all have to forgive 4 months rent to get 4 months. Is that how it works?
So whatever assistance they apply for, they will apply all of that money to that tenant's account, and that tenant will be considered paid in full. They will not be able to go back and apply for anything else. It'll bring that tenant current if they were able to apply for all the funds. And like Kevin said, each property can only apply for up to 30,000. We had several members who had 50,000, 60, 70, 100,000 in back rent. So they were only able to help a portion of their renters, not all of them. But once they apply those funds to that tenant would be considered paid in full, and they can just keep moving forward and paying rent, beginning in January.
Any other questions?
Quick question. You may have said this. Do y'all have a percentage on how many renters, like a percentage of this 31,000 units are delinquent at this point in time. Do y'all have a percentage on that?
I do not. I do know, so between MAP and MAA, there's 350,000 renters in the state, and I know from the MRAP program, it's a little over 580 applications that were submitted. So that's quite a large, number of renters and landlords that are applying for that.
Tell me that number again.
580, and I can get you more specific numbers. Once the applications are closed, we should kind of get some more information from MDA about how many applied, what the dollar amount was. So I'll be happy to follow up with you all with that information once we get it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I have a follow-up on that one. If no, I don't. No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you all so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay. I should have written it. You have-
Thank you, too, to the Apartment Association for what y'all did during this pandemic. I'm from a community with a large number of apartments, and I know that your workers did perform exceeding what should have been asked of them, but they did a wonderful job, and we appreciate that. So thank you.
That was my follow-up. You all are representing apartments from across the state, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And developers from across the state. So
We-
this pandemic has impacted everyone across this state who are in apartment complexes.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. They've had to find new ways to operate a business during the pandemic, and I think they've done a great job. So we're really proud of our members and what they've been able to do during this time. And thank you for recognizing that. That means a lot.
Thank you.
Right. Thank y'all.
One more. Senator Norwood.
So you have one opportunity. Yes.
I don't have a dollar amount, but I definitely think we need to really look at our options for considering more help for rent in the coming months. We're going to hopefully get a lot of tenants caught up and keep them in their homes through December, but this is ongoing. We know the pandemic's getting worse. It's not getting better right now. So I would just ask that you work with us, reach out to MAP, the Mississippi Home Corp, the Realtors Association, and let's have conversations about what we need to do to help assist our renters and the landlords. The landlords, they've made a big investment to the state with renters, and it does contribute to a lot of the economy, so we want to keep them in business and keep renters in their homes. So we would love to continue that conversation with you all in January and figure out what our number is and what those funds should be.
Will you do that, Mike?
You had, and you mentioned that a social worker, you have social workers working with your office or with, that's available to apartment complex?
We don't. The Mississippi Association of Affordable Housing Providers might, but MAA doesn't. Most of our properties are conventional properties.
And I guess my concern would be is that some of the renters will be able to go back to work. Some of them may not be able to go back to work but will anyone be working with them to access additional resources in the community on a concerted basis? I'm not talking about on just, one person, one complex. What I'm saying, on a concerted basis, will someone be working with them, or is that something that could be built in to make sure that you weed out those that are going back to work and those that are not going back to work and those that are not interested in going back to work and those types of things, to make sure that there's some accountability there?
Right, and I think, that again, that would be continued conversations with the legislator and with other associations who represent housing, and just making sure that we're looking at that, because a lot of people are still out of work. They may continue to be out of work. I do think, as far as MAA's members are concerned, they're going to continue to try to work with their residents. This really gave them some relief, but it didn't cure everything. It didn't make all the debts go away. So I think our members are going to continue to be compassionate and work with their residents as much as they can.
Because I understand, because I heard you say that the referral list, because there are a lot of money in the state that's available for training and retraining. So the jobs that they're currently holding, they may not be able to go back there, but they can apply for the training and the retraining money that would be able to help them to get back into the workforce. So if there's something that would be concerted, that would allow that to be spread across all the spectrum to make the greatest opportunities available for those individuals that would need the assistance.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's an opportunity for that, and we would love to be a part of that conversation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I have another question related to the Mississippi Association of Affordable Housing Providers. This is the lease purchase program, right?
I'm not 100% sure.
Tax credit?
Yes.
Where you can, you lease it for 10 or 15 years and then you purchase the home?
I believe some of them, but I don't believe all of their members. That's not the case.
Okay, do you know, and can you provide, if you don't know, how many, I don't know how long this program has been in existence, I've forgotten, but how many individuals end up purchasing those homes
Okay.
as opposed to, you know, they lease it and then they have to leave because they can't afford it when it's time to purchase?
Right. Yes, I don't have the answer to that, but I'll be happy to get back with you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
On his way, walking into the Capitol. Oh, well, I'm thinking about it. Talk to you afterwards, son. So will you be the one to build? You'll be doing
I'm limping a little bit, my knee swollen. I said, well, I guess I can't ride
something
no
that's
more.
based on what they said
For a minute,
yesterday.
'cause I don't gain
That we
weight.
could do some, see if we can get some model legislation somewhere. Yes.
And a community development financial institution. So again, I want to welcome Ms. Davis and turn it over to her to get us started.
All right, thank you, Ed. And good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Calandra Davis, Policy Analyst with Hope Policy Institute. And I just want to start by thanking each of you for the opportunity to be here today to share our perspective that is rooted not only in the experiences of Mississippians we talk to every day that are seeking to be future homeowners, but also in the data and analysis of the home ownership trends in our state. Next slide, please. Oh, I can, thank you. Yeah. All right, great, thank you, Ed. So first, we want to take a look at home ownership rates over the last 14 years. 2007 was a high point for Black homeownership in the state right before the 2008 recession. As we know, the 2008 foreclosure crisis and recessions disproportionately hit Black households. One reason for this being that in the lead up to the foreclosure crisis nationwide, Black families were provided loans on less favorable terms than white families, even with similar credit profiles. In Mississippi, for the loans originated between 2004 and 2008, by 2012, 30% of these loans to Black households had completed foreclosure or were at imminent risk, compared with 12% for white households. These foreclosures resulted in $352 million in lost wealth for communities of color in Mississippi. Unfortunately, Black homeownership has not only not recovered since the recession, it's continued to decline. Specifically, Black homeownership rates in 2019 are at the lowest point in 14 years, at 51%. The homeownership gap between Black and white Mississippians has also widened. You can see here that the rate declined by 8 percentage points, while the homeownership rate for white Mississippians has stayed steady. One factor contributing to the declining homeownership rate is the fact that Black Mississippians are more likely to be denied mortgage loans. Here's just one example. As you can see on the graph here, higher income Black applicants are more likely to be denied for a mortgage loan in Mississippi than lower income white households. The denial rate for Black residents earning over $150,000 is higher than the denial rate of white households earning between $30,000 and $50,000. In other words, Black households earning 3 times as much income as other households still face higher denial rates when applying for a mortgage. Next, we'll explore the impact that COVID-19 has had on homeownership. COVID-19 has only exacerbated the challenges Black homeowners face. For the week of October the 26th, which is the most recent data available, Black homeowners in Mississippi had higher levels of uncertainty than the rest of the U.S. about their ability to make next month's mortgage payment. Nearly 40% of Black homeowners in the state are uncertain that they will make next month's mortgage payment. Compounding the challenge of declining homeownership rates prior to the crisis, COVID-19 is threatening the stability of existing Mississippi homeowners. Additionally, COVID-19 is increasing the barriers to accessing homeownership in the future. For example, a survey of HOPE members found that 57% of our members who are not yet homeowners see homeownership further out of reach due to COVID-19. In addition to the long-term impacts these threats to homeownership will have on the racial wealth gap, the immediate consequences are concerning as well. People are bearing the psychological toll of possibly facing a public health crisis without the security of shelter. Now we will explore the barriers to homeownership. When we think about those who are not yet homeowners but desire to be, we must take into account the barriers that they face. So liquid asset poverty gap, the down payment hurdle, student loan debt, and I'll talk about each in turn. We'll start with the liquid asset poverty gap. The liquid asset poverty rate is one way to measure if people have the financial cushion to start the home buying process, particularly the ability to have a down payment. 4 out of 10 Black households in Mississippi are liquid asset poor. If someone does not have a 3-month cushion for basic expenses, they will face difficulty with saving for a down payment, whether that's 20%, 10%, or even 5%. This indicates that one of the biggest challenges facing Black households are high rates of liquid asset poverty, which is a cumulative result of other systemic factors such as lower incomes and rising cost of expenses just to get by. The rates are indicative of how the down payment hurdle affects one's ability to purchase a house. Another hurdle is student loan debt. Another hurdle for future homeowners is the amount of student loan debt they carry. Over 400,000 Mississippians carry over $14 billion in student loan debt, $14 billion. And Mississippians are really struggling to keep up with this debt, as over $2 billion of student loan debt in Mississippi is delinquent. As you can see in the chart on the left, student loan delinquencies and defaults, the green line, now far outpace delinquencies on other debts in Mississippi, more than auto loans, mortgages, and credit cards. We also see here in the next chart that delinquencies disproportionately fall on communities of color at 26%. These delinquencies have also have severe consequences for future home ownership. For example, defaulting on a student loan debt damages a borrower's credit score, making it more difficult to qualify for an affordable mortgage in the future. The student loan debt burden is heavy and a hindrance for future homeowners, even if someone is current on the loan payments. This is because the amount of outstanding student loan debt causes a borrower's debt-to-income ratio to be too high to qualify for a mortgage loan. HOPE members know this burden all too well, unfortunately, and I'd like to just share two stories. For one HOPE member, her student loan servicer misplaced her paperwork, which then led to garnishment of her wages, the loss of her car, damaged credit score, and nearly the loss of her home, despite working full-time and getting a promotion. For another young woman, just at the start of her public service career and well-positioned to buy her first home, student loan debt continues to stand in her way. So now I will turn it over to my colleague, Ed Sivak, who will examine HOPE's experiences in breaking down these barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Through the first part of this presentation, we had the opportunity to learn about the challenges and root causes associated with the homeownership gap between white and black households. Over the next 4 slides, we will focus our comments on the strategies and approaches that Hope Credit Union has undertaken to bridge these gaps. As I mentioned earlier, Hope is a black-owned, women-owned credit union, a community development financial institution, and a policy institute that provides financial services, aggregates resources, and engages in advocacy to mitigate the extent to which factors such as race, gender, birthplace, and wealth limit one's ability to prosper. Hope has 24 branches located in the Deep South states of Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. As I mentioned earlier, we're headquartered here in Jackson, and we have branches throughout the Delta, East Central Mississippi, and on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We employ 220 associates. The charts on this page provide a snapshot of our mortgage lending through the third quarter of 2020. As of September 30th, we closed 163 mortgages for approximately $21 million. Importantly, Hope's homeownership program extended opportunities to first-time homebuyers, women, and borrowers of color, who in our region are nearly all black. 84% of our borrowers were first-time homebuyers. This is even in an environment where refinances are high. 63% are women, and 85% are borrowers of color. Mississippi is where we do a plurality of our mortgage lending. About 44% of our loans by number are in the state and 39% by dollar. The next slide provides a window on how we achieve these results. We manually underwrite our mortgages. We don't simply put information into a software program and allow a computer to spit back we don't just put our information into a software program and allow the computer to rely on an algorithm to provide us with a decision. That's frankly one of the key differences between Hope Credit Union and a bank. We don't just look at the loan, we look at the person. So if a person applies for a mortgage and he or she has a thin file, no credit score, we'll look at non-traditional sources of credit. We've learned that if someone has paid their rent for 12 months in a row, if they have paid their cell phone bill on time for 12 months, his or her loan will not be a high risk of credit loss. As a result of this process, we make loans to borrowers with lower credit scores, roughly 100 points lower than the credit scores of mortgages made by lenders from across the country. Last but not least, we structure our products to meet our borrowers where they are. Ms. Davis appropriately pointed out the role of wealth and the absence of it as a barrier to home ownership, particularly among black households in the state. One way we overcome this barrier is by offering a product that does not require a down payment. Additionally, we do not require mortgage insurance, which lowers the monthly payment for the borrower. And you see the results. In 2007, on the eve of the Great Recession, 55% of our mortgage borrowers were mortgage borrowers of color. Today, it is 85%. Importantly, these are responsible loans. Given the underwriting we do on each borrower, on each loan, we have had very few losses over the last 10 years. In fact, our loss rate has never gone above 26 basis points, 0.26%. This year, in the throes of the pandemic, we have a net charge-off rate of 12 basis points, 0.12%. As I mentioned earlier, down payment requirements often pose hurdles for people, particularly people of color, to home ownership. On this slide, we would like to share the difference made through a program called Neighborhood Lift. Through this partnership with Wells Fargo and NeighborWorks America and many other banks in the state, down payment assistance grants of $7,500 to $10,000 were made available. The $7,500 was for anyone who qualified based on income. The $10,000 was for first responders and teachers. The program was administered by Hope Enterprise Corporation. Annual incomes of borrowers were individuals with incomes below 80% of the local median income in a county. That was the income that was used to qualify for the down payment assistance. The map on the left shows where the down payment assistance grants were made throughout the state, and you see fairly widespread coverage, a couple of gaps in southwest Mississippi and east central Mississippi. I just want to share a story of the difference that this makes. Quintus Johnson and his wife, Cassandra, have built their careers on serving others. Quintus is an officer in Leland, Mississippi. He was with the police department, and his wife, Cassandra, is a school teacher. When it was time to buy a home, they found for themselves and their 4 little girls that it was difficult. They didn't have the money for the down payment. Traditional lenders were hesitant to serve them because of that. You know, one of the things that Quintus said throughout this process is that time and time again we were disappointed by the banks. If we could afford it, the neighborhood wasn't right. If the neighborhood was right, we couldn't get the financing. We looked for a long time and started to give up hope. We decided that we would keep renting or settle for something that just wasn't what we wanted. Then he was made aware of the Neighborhood Lift program, and this made the Johnsons' dream of home ownership a reality. The program, again, offers down payment grants for first-time home buyers. Home buyers then agree to stay in the home for 5 years. The balance to be repaid drops after each year, and after 5 years is completely forgiven. In May of 2019, the Johnsons moved into their 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in Greenville, Mississippi. One of the things that Mr. Johnson said was, "It's an awesome feeling to know that your hard-earned money is going to pay for something that is yours." This house is perfect for us, a blessing. It's a long-awaited journey with some obstacles now out of the way, thanks to Hope and Neighborhood Lift. So we want to move into recommendations, and as we do so, I want to underscore the importance of home ownership and its benefits. Research conducted by the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty has found that home ownership builds wealth. In the United States, each additional year of home ownership increases a household's total net worth an average of $13,700. Home ownership also reduces high school dropout rates. It also reduces teenage pregnancy rates. Homeowners tend to have lower risk of unemployment. When unemployment does happen, we find that the unemployment spells are shorter. We also find that there are also higher wages. Children of homeowners also exhibit higher rates of high school graduation and post-secondary enrollment than the children of renters. They also have a lower probability of depression. All of these are benefits of home ownership. And so with this backdrop in mind, I will take the first 3 recommendations and then turn it back over to Ms. Davis to close us out. Down payment assistance. We can find ways to increase down payment assistance in this state. As you heard from the story that I shared, it's clear that down payment assistance is a direct and proven way to bridge the home ownership gap in the state of Mississippi. It's a tool we use regularly, and it is a tool that should be put to use more frequently. There are many examples of structuring down payment assistance programs to ensure low and moderate income borrowers receive targeted funds. We obviously have programs here through the Mississippi Home Corps. I am of the opinion that even if you took every down payment assistance program in the state, collectively, public, private, and philanthropic, it is an approach that can always use more resources. We need to increase support for community development financial institutions and minority depositories. Community development financial institutions and minority depository institutions, these are Black-owned banks and credit unions, have been shown in studies conducted by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to locate in communities and lend more frequently to borrowers of color. Other states have created grant programs for these institutions to cover increased costs of bridging capital gaps. Finally, we should conduct a racial equity assessment of the deployment of housing resources in the state of Mississippi. We know from the data, and we know from our experience at Hope Credit Union, that there are gaps in mortgage lending and home ownership by race. Knowing these gaps and given the demographics of our state, this committee should request and conduct a study on the deployment of all housing resources from across all levels of government to understand how well we are doing in the targeting of scarce resources that we have towards closing the gap. This study should specifically interrogate the extent to which the resources are being deployed in a manner that is equitable across race and also closes the gaps. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Davis to finish us up.
Thank you, Ed. All right, so the next recommendation is to address the student loan debt burden. State legislators and policymakers can hold servicers accountable. This means that states have the ability to set common sense ground rules to ensure student loan servicers treat borrowers fairly, such as accountability for misplaced paperwork or not putting people into the correct payment plans. Next, we want to enact state-level protections for private student loan debt, and then rein in predatory for-profit colleges. Then we'll move on to enacting state-level fair housing protections. Mississippi is just one of few states in the country without a state-level fair housing law. Providing state-level protections against housing discrimination is another important piece of closing the home ownership gap. Today, state-level protections are even more critical than in the past in the light of the recent rollback of protections under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So again, thank you all for your dedication and your work, but also really encouraging you to enact policies and laws to make sure that we are closing the home ownership gap and the racial wealth gap. Thank you.
Any questions, subcommittee members? Senator Boyd?
I've got a series of them. The first one, I want to go back to your slide that you presented, in 1 in 5 Mississippians with student loan debt in default. Is this statistic, I want to make sure I'm reading this chart correctly. Are you talking about those with, this is the percentage of those that are in debt already? This is not 1 in 5 Mississippians, correct?
You're asking for the
I
percentage of
want to
those
make
who-
sure I'm reading the chart correctly. We're not saying that 19% of all Mississippians have student loan debt in default.
We are.
We are saying 19% of Mississippians have student loan debt in default. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, the next question I have too, along that same lines, is will you articulate a little bit more on do we know what percentage of this is from for-profit college? Do we have any idea of the percentage of this that may be attributed to for-profit colleges?
No, we do not, but that is information that we can look up if necessary.
Okay. And you mentioned in your recommendations about the for-profit college. Will you expand on that just a little bit more?
Yes, of course. So students who are enrolled in for-profit colleges are more likely to have higher debt burdens, also more likely to have lower completion rates and higher debt defaults than those at other universities. So that data is out there. We don't have it with us today. States have the ability to enact reforms that protect veterans and others from predatory for-profit colleges to ensure that the money paid to the school is going towards the tuition and their instruction.
Okay. All right, let me ask you this. This is a little bit off of what you've talked about, but it is something that has come before the legislature. This is my first year here, but I know it's been introduced into legislation a number of times, and it's been discussed in a number of places. It seems like in the state that various people have proposed creating a mandatory curriculum at some point that a child would have as they are in middle school or college of financial literacy. Is that something, working with people, that you think would be beneficial for students at that young age to have some type of financial literacy classes or anything like that? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, so definitely financial literacy is important to us at Hope. We use financial literacy at our Provine branch, so we're in one of the JPS schools at Provine. And so, of course, we believe financial literacy is important. We also see financial literacy as just one part of the equation, that financial literacy does not actually break down the systemic barriers.
Okay. Y'all are teaching that at Provine? You actually have a program that does that?
Yes.
At Provine?
We do, and also there are student branch, so there are student staff at the school who takes control of that financial literacy. So they have the support of Hope staff. We help guide and train the students, and those students take on the financial literacy, and then they distribute it to their students, teachers, staff, and the surrounding community.
Sounds like an amazing program. I'd love to see it. Okay, another question. I'm so glad you provided this information, because it is very disturbing to me, given the low interest loans, the historically low interest rates we have right now, that we have declining home ownership. And I think that is, it's a very enlightening chart that you've just shown us. So I think it's something we definitely, it raises a lot of concerns, particularly about our state. But I also wanted just to congratulate y'all on your, and really want to know more about your organization. Hold on, I'm going to get to the slide for a second. Your charge-off rate is absolutely amazing. So that is, I'm on a bank board, and I am so impressed with what y'all done and the quality and what y'all are doing to really work with borrowers. I think it's something we all could learn a little bit from. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is really impressive.
Senator Norwood?
Regarding the student loan, there was some federal, I don't know if it was legislation or if there was an executive order that was signed to, and then it was rolled back. Is that, had you all, and I'm not sure if it had got to the point where it was actually in effect, but if it was, did you see an impact of that legislation? And if not, if that legislation is or executive order is reenacted, is that, because I know it was to forgive some of those student loan debts, especially. I mean, I think this was basically laid out or targeting the private colleges that were more parallel with the predatory lenders. Is that did you all have any? And I don't remember. Was that ever enacted, or it was rescinded before it was enacted? Before it actually got a chance to gain any information on that?
Right. So to answer your question in two parts, I do not believe that was ever approved. And then also, we have not actually dug into how that has impacted our borrowers. So we haven't looked into the impact of any recent legislation regarding student loans on our borrowers at the moment.
Is that something that would, that you also, I mean, I'm sure you see it as being something that's being beneficial, but do you think in the political climate that that's something that we could maybe get behind and enforce? And, because I know here in Mississippi we had quite a few private entities that, and Mississippi, I think it was what, at one point, the predatory lending capital of the nation. It still is.
Is it the?
Have a lot of high cost
Yeah.
lending that takes place.
Okay. You all have any research on that though that we could get, because we oftentimes get legislation that come up regarding these institutions, and I think the more informed that we could be, the better we would be to address it.
Yes, we definitely have research that we could share on actually research that we conducted with our HOPE members, and then also looking at it at a larger scale in our region.
Okay. And my final question is on the down payment assistance. And the down payment assistance monies that you get, does it come from HOPE? I mean, does it come from Home Corps, or you get direct funding for the down payment assistance?
Well, yes, our LIFT program, which is our down payment assistance program, that money came from a partnership with NeighborWorks and Wells Fargo. So no, sir, it did not come from Mississippi Home Corps.
How much?
You want to?
On those points, the program
Sir.
highlighted was exactly.
Sir, can you speak in the mic?
Yeah.
People are listening online.
Ms. Davis is correct that the program that was highlighted was with Wells Fargo and NeighborWorks America. I just also want to include that we use down payment assistance program from places like the Mississippi Home Corps, from partnerships with the Federal Home Loan Bank and other housing finance agencies from across the Deep South.
Do you know about how much you get from Home Corps?
I don't off the top of my head. That's a number that we could certainly get.
Thanks very much.
I have one question. The student loans, how can we develop a program, I guess along the lines, are you familiar with the critical teacher program, where if a teacher goes into an area that there's a shortage, that they can get a down payment and they have to stay there for 3 years?
Yes, ma'am.
How can, do you know if any other states have anything related to student loan where the state will assist to pay those student loans if our kids stay in the state for X number of years, and perhaps we can address the brain drain that occurs in the state of Mississippi?
Yes, so I am not aware of any states who have enacted that program, but that is some information. I can look up some best practices to share.
Thank you. Would you provide that to Ms. Trials?
Yes.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for the information that you've shared.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to clarify on that student loan, on the chart, I just wanted to be sure that it was clear that it's 19% of Mississippians that have a student loan debt. Got you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much.
And you will provide us the breakout though between the private and the public of student loans.
While we are, our last presenter, Attorney Will Bedwell, the Mississippi Center for Justice, and we do want to thank our committee assistant, Pat Trowles, for coordinating all of our presenters yesterday and today, and our staff attorney, Ethan Samuels, who's going to be gathering all this information and providing us some great legislation. and Andrew Yates, Attorney Yates with the governor's office, our lieutenant governor's office, our policy analyst. And as a result of the information that we got on yesterday, we are going to try to have another meeting in December 10th, to get some clarification from the mental health on the drop-off of the patients, as well as we're going to get information from the Mississippi Development Authority on the community block grants that they do for home ownership. Attorney Bedwell.
Hey, good morning. If you can all hear me all right with my mask on, I'm going to leave it on. I appreciate it.
That's fine.
Thanks again. As I was introduced, my name is William Bedwell, and I'm an attorney at the Mississippi Center for Justice. We're a nonprofit public interest law firm, and our mission is to advance racial and economic justice for all Mississippians. We do that through we think, a unique approach that does involve litigation and defense and actual court, but also involves community education as well as policy and legislative advocacy. And I work primarily on housing, and so I want to talk, if we have time, of at least two issues that we've been running into over the past year and a half, and that have only been exacerbated by the current crisis, the pandemic. Now, the first I'm going to speak about is rent-to-own real estate contracts, which we refer to as rent-to-own schemes or built-to-fail contracts. Now, I think the presentation before me was a excellent segue and setup, that they really discussed the crisis and declining home ownership in Mississippi. And you all are well aware of now how many Mississippians have a difficulty getting traditional lending to buy a home. Now, where do these Mississippians go when they can't get a bank to sign off on a mortgage? They're often enticed into landlord-sellers presenting a rent-to-own contract for a house and for a mobile home. And these promises sadly end up being too good to be true. And the scheme, the landlord that perpetrate these, their object is ultimately never to sell the home, deed the home to the renter buyer. They sell substandard housing stock at inflated interest rates, and they often do not provide any sort of amortized schedule or ultimate purchase price, so that the renter buyer in these schemes are trapped. They know they're slowly paying down this figure that is in fact actually ballooning, and they don't know when they're going to finally achieve a sale. Meantime, if they ever miss one payment, for instance, the landlord goes to justice court, presents it as really a rental contract, and quickly has them summarily evicted for one missed payment. Now, the problem is the purchase price seems good to people that enter into the contracts. It seems like it'll be doable. Now, once they get the interest tacked on, they realize, oh, this is a little bit higher, but something even worse and more insidious happens. Now, I mentioned the housing stock is usually substandard, sometimes borderline dilapidated. Well, when they need a repair made, they go to the landlord. The landlord all of a sudden explains to them, well, no, you're on the hook because you're buying this property. You have to fix it. Well, these renter buyers often don't have the money to fix it out of pocket. Not only that, these contracts are never recorded in the land records. They never get a deed of trust. So they have no document with which to go to a bank, get a loan to fix the property. Not only that, many contractors are unwilling to work on the properties just at the behest of the renter. So not only are they paying too much for this housing, then they have the burden of trying to shell out to fix the property. And in the end, they almost always, and this is anecdotally, but I can't point you to one person I've run into in my practice, and the other attorneys at MCJ can't either. One person that has successfully gotten to the end and received a deed to their home based on one of these contracts. Now, thankfully, the most recent person we took on to try and help them after they had been almost evicted in justice court twice, brought to county court by this landlord that was trying to get rid of them after they had entered into a contract before Hurricane Katrina, paying $650 a month. They still, according to the landlord, didn't own the home, even though we did the math. They had paid well above the agreed upon purchase price with the interest. It took us about a year in litigation to get the court to transfer the property to our client, and then we also had to defend the landlord's appeal. So that's the only way we know someone's actually gotten their home, when they enter into these contracts. And so we then started saying, well, what's the protection? Because going through the court system, these are people that cannot afford an attorney to go up against one of these landlords. They find themselves pro se litigants in justice court defending themselves. At best, a justice court judge may recognize that, oh, this is really a property dispute that exceeds my jurisdiction. I won't rule on it. But that doesn't get the person the deed. So we partnered with one of our pro bono partners, DLA Piper law firm, and conducted a 50-state survey to say, how are other states regulating this? Because that's the problem here, is a lack of regulation. This is operated in a gray area. There's no recording of these contracts, and people are being preyed upon. And it's a big hurt to household wealth, but also no one's ever going to attain home ownership. So that 50-state survey, looking at it now, we determined Mississippi is in the minority of states that either do not have a regulation that specifically talks about rent-to-own real estate, or they don't have, or a regulation about mobile home rent-to-own fraud, or a consumer protection law that's going to cover this specific situation. And again, like I said, we found Mississippi's in the minority there. And I talked about it in the real estate context, but I also want to briefly mention it in the mobile home park situation, which we're also running into. So mobile homes, when someone first purchases a mobile home, when it's first manufactured, it is personal property in the eyes of the law, and it's taxed there such. So there is a situation where someone owns a trailer park, and they own these trailers, and they could sell the trailer to someone. They could rent to own that separate, if they're paying lot rent separately. And I'll mention this again in the next issue because there's a problem that often occurs there. But the owner of a trailer park can also attach the trailers to the land legally and physically. And they're no longer taxed as personal property, and they can't be bought or sold separate from the land. Well, trailer parks, we have found, will enter into rent-to-own contracts, tell the person, oh, it's for the trailer, not the land, when in reality, they can never get a true bill of sale, true certificate of title for that trailer. The converse side, which I'm going to get into the next issue, is that they fall behind on maybe they've owned the trailer, but they fall behind on lot rent, and all of a sudden they can't move the trailer. But I'll come back to that. So what we really think could be done, and other states have done, and we've got a few good examples here, the way that this industry could say exist but be regulated so that these schemes aren't perpetrated, people aren't defrauded, is one is having more consumer protection, where someone has a specific remedy to file suit for repossession or recover damages if the landlord's taken it in a fraudulent manner, like going to justice court to get it back and acting like it's just a rental contract. Also important would be requirement of disclosures by the seller, including the total number of payments necessary and when someone would actually pay off, and that total amount due when they would have a vested ownership. Then also important would be a redemptive period for buyers who miss a scheduled payment, So similar to months you get in a foreclosure process if you miss a payment. Here we have landlords going after they may have been paying 10 years to buy this home. They miss one payment. The landlord, 3 days after they're late on that payment, a landlord goes to justice court and gets them evicted, and they lose the house after all those years. They need a longer redemptive period. And then fourth, and I mean of paramount importance to all the others, is a legal recordation requirement, so that there is in the land records a document that shows if I'm a renter buyer, I have an ownership interest. That way I can get insurance on the property. I can get repairs done if I need to. And ultimately, if the landlord tries to go to justice court and just have me evicted, I can show, no, I've got an ownership interest in this property, a deed of trust on this property. So would you like, I could pause now if there's questions about that before I go on to the next issue I'll present.
Have a question?
The last paragraph on page 1, that's very interesting. I did not know that Mississippi did not have statutes regulating rent to own, and so that's very interesting. I think it's something that we should be interested in pursuing.
Well, I think it's a surprise to many that we've talked about. I mean, just other attorneys in the state even, and then partners we have outside of the state whose states have such a regulation. You know, it seems to blindside them that this could just operate freely. But I think attorneys that deal with landlords regularly or deal with the indigent recognize this is a growing phenomenon.
When you're talking about these rent-to-own real estate contracts, are you talking about the Section 42 housing?
Those are, and so that's something we've recently noticed that, and to get, so the 42, the low-income tax credit properties, they actually are incentivized by the federal government to be a rent-to-own. When you apply, you get that points, you know, of how, and that's one that you get extra points for. We know of some of those projects, but we don't have the data at the end of it, whether or not it's actually resulting in home ownership. And there's a recent article from early October by an AP writer, and I think it showed up in the TJ Journal, the Columbus Dispatch, and I forget where else, an reporter Tess Verbin out of Starkville or Columbus. And there's some very new projects there. The developer approached her about covering it because it's such a good deal. And the people she interviews there, it appears to be a very mixed bag of who's happy with the situation they're in and who is not. So those Section 42, they don't have a special requirement still. They're unregulated once it gets going, and there's not a real check on it there either, which is dangerous.
So then, what specific contracts are you talking about? When you're saying landlords, you're saying someone who has an apartment complex?
Generally, it's single-family homes, but it's the property owner, and the way the contract looks. I mean, it's often a rental contract where the landlord writes in at the top, / for purchase, or to own, and then you go to the very last page of the contract, and it says, also, buyer will purchase once $80,000 at 8% interest, 10% interest have been paid. Buyer is responsible for all repairs. And that's it. And then you have, they go into justice court, act like it's just a rental. Justice court judges, I know. I was in justice court yesterday. We had the whole room kind of scarily filled, went out into the hallway, out to the street. They're in a hurry dealing with this, and it's something that needs to have more regulation so that we know how to deal with these contracts, and they're not just, after paying 10 years, summarily evicted. Yes.
Senator Norwood?
Just a follow-up question, because you have the Mississippi State Real Estate Commission controls your normal real estate transaction, but in terms of this rent to own, there's no authority that provide any guidance or any oversight over this. And if you may go to 8 different rent to own properties, and you may have totally 8 different situations regarding because they put in there what they want to put in there, more or less to their own benefit.
Correct. We know of no governing body or group like what you mentioned that would deal with this, and we see it in a lot of different iterations. There is the low income tax credit aspect. We see a lot of properties that are single-family homes. They've bought at, say, tax sales, very cheaply, not repaired, and then resold. And then we also see it in mobile home parks. So it's got a lot of different iterations.
Senator Boyd?
I would assume that the consumer protection laws that we have on the books right now don't cover this.
Right, not in any specific manner. So we're working on a project to come up with better litigation strategies to defend, because we just see too many people being taken advantage of. But we haven't had any luck applying those specifically, and haven't found any case law where it's been successfully used. All right, thank you. Well, I'll go on to this next issue I want to talk about, and I might have kind of previewed it some with just how quickly Justice Court works before and where people find themselves in a bind. But I want to talk about work of the legislature done in the 2019 session, which were amendments to the Mississippi landlord-tenant statutes, and the effect we've seen in the past year and a half of what has happened. We believe that they must be withdrawn for constitutional problems, but also because of practical issues we're seeing. And, I'll mention again, I think I said at the beginning, these issues I'm talking about have only been exacerbated because of the current situation, while I'm wearing a mask up here. We would maintain there's an eviction crisis in Mississippi before the pandemic. It's much worse now. And what the 2019 amendments did is they made a faster and more final, higher level of finality to the eviction process as it's held in justice courts. And what this means is we're finding more and more people evicted without any quick remedy or time to find new housing, which we believe is putting more people on the streets. And again, at a time when the CDC is telling us, don't evict anyone unless there's really a health and safety issue going on. We don't want people out in the streets for any reason. We don't want people, what we call invisible homelessness, couch surfing. We don't want people crowding in multiple people into one family's home. We have a statute now on the books that is one of, if not the fastest eviction statutes in the nation. And so I'll describe the situation before these statutes were amended and then talk about it after. So before, generally, a tenant who was being evicted for, say, non-payment of rent and goes to justice court, they're still given 3 to 5 days following that eviction judgment. The judge finds, yes, you do owe the money, I'm granting an eviction, that they have time before a warrant of removal is issued. A constable comes and removes them. Also during that time was time when they could redeem with their landlord, pay him what they owe plus the court cost, and remain in the property. So evictions were often used by landlords as a means to get a real judicial record and some pressure on the tenant to pay. Often we found, and in sometimes more rural parts of Mississippi, justice court judges would routinely give a tenant till the end of the month to pay up or move out. Now, the new statutes, they're very specific and very immediate to the judge to say if you're granting an eviction, you're granting and giving immediate removal. that the landlord, right then and there, if they win on the eviction, they can have the constable go immediately and remove the person from their home. Not only that, the landlord will keep everything in the home. Now, these present a few different constitutional issues. During the 2019 session, I believe we submitted comments to the legislature and/or the governor saying, hold off, this is going to create constitutional problems. The Attorney General is going to have to defend these, let alone all the practical, terrible implications it has on Mississippians. Well, just over a year later, there is now litigation in the Northern District Federal Court of Mississippi challenging these statutes on constitutional grounds, saying they're unconstitutional. I cited the case in here, Connor v. Alton. It was brought in June by the University of Mississippi School of Law's Housing Clinic and the Housing Clinic Director, Desiree Hensley. That fact scenario was a mentally ill woman who was evicted. The landlord and constable immediately went to her home, beat her back to the apartment where she lived, would not let her get her shoes out of there, get medications. And these are all just facts that right now in that case are not in dispute. The Attorney General's made an entrance to argue whether or not the law is constitutional. We hadn't seen that argument yet. The housing clinic has submitted a memoranda on law explaining why it's unconstitutional. But just that practical effect that someone had got no true notice and hearing before the disposition of their property. So yes, there's a quick hearing, do you owe this money or not? But there's not a hearing about what kind of property is in there. Would that satisfy the judgment? Is there a $10,000 gold ring in there or something that's going to satisfy this judgment? No, the person loses everything immediately. So there's a real due process unconstitutional problem with it. But further, it eliminates people's due process to appeal with supersedious. So if we have a client come in that says, hey, I just got evicted at justice court. I don't have anywhere to go. I think I was evicted wrongly. I think the judge got it wrong. I think the landlord lied to the judge. What can you do? Well, we try and file a supersedious appeal, but that requires the tenant to post a money bond. It requires us to do paperwork, often get it submitted, sometimes have the judge sign off on it, and all that takes time. Now, if someone is immediately removed as soon as they're evicted, you cannot, as a practical matter, file that supersedious appeal and protect them from further damages and keep them in the home. So that's the other big due process problem with it. But I'll mention again, I think, at a time when public policy should protect and support the health and welfare of Mississippians and the public over all other considerations like we have right now in the pandemic, that it just brings into stark light and contrast how unconscionable and what bad public policy the immediate removal is. I know, and I've heard it from landlords I've spoken with when I've done community education presentations that say, well, they owed me money. Why do I have to wait and have it back? Truly, no one's monetary concern should trump constitutional due process. I don't believe as an attorney. But again, as a practical matter, if you're evicting someone a few days into the month, in the middle of the month, to presuppose that all of a sudden you're being able to rent it back out immediately the next day, and that's adding some kind of money to your business is, I think, gross oversimplification. I don't think that's what actually plays out, that landlords are not so terribly hurt by having one getting 10 days, like often used to be given, or to the end of a month for a tenant to pay up or get out, that their right to do business or their business finances are so hurt or impinged that it should trump due process, be putting people immediately out on the street. There's some more technical parts of the constitutional argument really specific to the language, which is a little confusing, of the statutes and what they require on the summonses, that tenants do not go to justice court realizing at all that if they lose, they should have already packed. Even if they believe they are going to win and know, there's some chance they could lose, they need to be packed and have everything out of their house, have a new place to go. Otherwise, they're going to lose that and be damaged. That's not what these summonses really explain to the tenants, nor are they aware of. And I think there's plenty of landlords at the beginning when this was passed, and I know justice court judges had to be trained about the new law, that didn't realize what a serious implication it was going to have, and that we're now seeing and is now challenged. So we really bring up this issue saying, respectfully, the legislature went too far, got too strict, and there could be a much safer, constitutional, and really explicit and easy to understand eviction process and statutes for everyone to follow.
Any questions?
I think you articulated the concerns that we had when the legislation came up on the floor. So I'm just sorry that had to come to fruition and realization, but those are some of the same concerns that we had when the legislation came up on the floor.
We thank you, Attorney Bedwell, for sharing the information with us. And this concludes Senator Boyd for a motion. A motion.
Oh, rise and report, sorry.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I think I've got brain freeze, I'm so cold. And I'm not, never cold.